All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are looking at this incredible hero's journey. But actually, scratch that. Our protagonist today isn't even a person, it's an entire city. We're talking about Manchester, England. We're going to explore how it completely transformed from a pretty grim post-industrial landscape into the ecstatic epicenter of a Day-Glo cultural explosion that literally changed music and fashion forever. To really wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of what happened here, I want you to think about Hunter S. Thompson's famous quote. It seems entirely reasonable to think that every now and then, the energy of a whole generation comes to a head in a long, fine flash. Now, Thompson originally wrote those words about 1960s San Francisco, but man, it perfectly anchors our understanding of what happened 20 years later in the UK. Just as the US counterculture had that defining zeitgeist moment in '67, the late 1980s saw this magnificent, chaotic wave sweep across Britain. And Manchester, it was absolute ground zero.
So, right off the bat, you might be wondering, how exactly did a gloomy, post-industrial northern city become the center of a day-glow cultural revolution? Well, let's just drop straight into the chaotic, propulsive energy of this scene and find out.
Okay, let's set the scene. Before the late 80s, Manchester was really hard hit by recession, downsizing, and Thatcherite monetary policies. It was heavily stereotyped as having black skies and gray spirits. Even the local indie music and art scene back then, which was spearheaded by the early days of Factory Records and the designer Peter Saville, was characterized by this austere, gloomy minimalism. It was very cold, very cerebral. But then, this massive cultural rupture happened. Pre-Manchester's gray severity was entirely swallowed up by Madchester's chaotic, multicolored, hedonistic bombast. This vibrant rave culture emerged that absolutely nobody saw coming.
And here's where it gets kind of wild. The term Madchester itself, this scene that flawlessly blended indie guitar rock, electronic acid house, psychedelia, and 60s pop, it was actually coined entirely by accident. No way, right? Video directors Philip Shotton and Keith Jobling, the Bailey brothers, originally came up with the word as a potential t-shirt slogan for an abandoned film. But Factory Records boss Tony Wilson loved it so much that he literally forced the band Happy Mondays to rename their upcoming EP from Rave On to Madchester Rave On. Sean Ryder, the lead singer, recalled they just said, "Great, yeah, go with it," because Manchester was mad at the time.
So what was the spark? The inciting incident for all this madness can be traced back to 1987 at the Haçienda, which was a nightclub co-owned by members of the band New Order. Basically, two massive shifts happened simultaneously on that dance floor. First, DJs started playing pulsating American acid house music. And second, the drug MDMA, or ecstasy, suddenly flooded the city. This explosive combination totally transformed the Haçienda from a struggling venue into this intense, life-changing communal experience. It was spontaneous, it was awe-inspiring, and this specific cocktail of house music and ecstasy acted as the direct catalyst for what became known as the UK's Second Summer of Love in 1988. But this wasn't just about the music, right? It profoundly changed how people dressed. Academic researcher Dr. Susan Atkin coined this brilliant concept of fashion in motion. See, because this was a scene built around marathon dancing in hot, packed clubs, sartorial choices were specifically made to enhance and respond to physical movement. Dress became way less about traditional visual judgments or rigid subcultures. Instead, it was all about the physical interaction of the garment and the wearer, just moving together fluidly on the dance floor. And because it was all about movement, you basically had two distinct coexisting looks within Manchester. On one hand, you had the famous baggy look. We're talking loose-fitting, fluid clothes, flared Joe Bloggs jeans, tie-dye tops, and of course, those iconic fishing hats worn by the Stone Roses drummer Rini. It was this really imaginative mix of retro hippie and football casual. On the other hand, you had the sportswear look. This was tighter, highly practical, and body-conscious, directly inspired by athletic gear like tracksuits. But here's the thing. Both styles serve the exact same purpose: total freedom of movement. They managed to unify entirely different groups under the totally egalitarian umbrella of rave culture. When you put all this together, the entire subculture was essentially a modern carnival. It was defiant, deviant, and entirely driven by the body. The scene was absolutely steeped in ironic hedonism. Bands like the Happy Mondays basically acted as the court jesters of this movement. They were like Pied Pipers, leading their audiences into a collective Dionysian frenzy. Whether you were sweating it out at an illegal warehouse rave or at a Happy Mondays gig, the normal moral restraints of society were completely suspended. It was a defiant, joyful rejection of that gray, austere reality waiting outside the club doors. And this chaotic energy absolutely took over the visual arts too. Just look at Central Station Design, the company responsible for the visual branding of the Happy Mondays. Fun fact, the core designers were actually cousins of the band's writer brothers. They completely rejected the serious minimalist graphic traditions of early factory records. Instead, they went all in on bold, head-warping Day-Glo palettes. They utilized ironic, childlike whimsy with literal playground scrawls. They even used specific artistic spot effects to directly reference the blurred perceptions of drug use and created these wild, messy collages out of candy wrappers and melted toys. They visually captured the era's unfettered, nonsensical energy in direct defiance of serious indie art conventions. Tony Wilson actually hit the nail on the head when he famously noted, "The second half of the factory story is best summed up by the painterly eccentricity of Central Station." This messy, brilliantly subversive art style profoundly branded a whole generation. It perfectly mirrored the shifting, disheveled, funky sounds of the music itself. It was art that looked exactly the way the music sounded and exactly the way the dance floor felt.
But, of course, an explosion of this magnitude, well, it couldn't last forever, could it? The build-up to the crash was absolutely monumental. By late 1989, indie bands like the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays were literally performing on top of the pops. In May 1990, the Stone Roses played to a massive crowd at Spike Island, a legendary event that people dubbed the Woodstock for the E-generation. Madchester bands absolutely dominated the indie charts. But, the excesses soon caught up with them. The Happy Mondays flew out to Barbados to record their album Yes Please, but it ended up becoming this crack-fueled disaster that went way, way over budget. The album was a critical and financial failure when it dropped in late 1992, and just a month later, it contributed heavily to Factory Records officially declaring bankruptcy. Just like that, the whole shebang, at least in its purest form, had collapsed.
So what does this all mean for us today? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because this short-lived, chaotic scene forever changed modern music formulas. By successfully fusing alternative jingle-jangle guitar rock with electronic dance beats, they created a sonic blueprint that is literally still used today. It inspired the broader UK baggy movement with bands like Blur and directly paved the way for Britpop giants like Oasis. But beyond the music, Manchester fundamentally altered the physical geography of its home city. It totally revitalized Manchester's northern quarter and the gay village, catalyzed a massive boom in city center living, and significantly boosted the local media and creative industries. This underground scene literally rebuilt the city. Which brings us to a really fascinating question to ponder as we wrap up. In today's hyper-connected digital age, can modern music scenes ever replicate the localized, unmanufactured, chaotic magic of Manchester? Back then, it was just the right music, the right clubs, and the right people coming together in one physical gray city to organically create a Day-Glo revolution. Could a spontaneous, intensely localized cultural explosion like that ever happen again? Thank you so much for exploring this wild journey with me on The Explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.